Breaker Sundered by Melinda Kucera. Dedication. O guardian, most dear, I'm sundered and near to tears. My magic's barred by fear, and all I hold dear's in peril until I clear this question, but I persevere. I climb like a mountaineer to you, whom I revere. O guardian, most dear. Traditional Shea or in prayer. Acknowledgements. Thank you, JC. We enjoyed adventuring with you again, but could you please leave the adversary at home next time? We deserve a break from his shenanigans. Yours truly, Ran, son of Sarn, asker of favors. Get lost with us. Hi readers. Thank you for reading Breaker Sundered. This is the book our scribe wanted to deliver last time, but there was a mutiny. See the bonus story at the end of Breaker Falls for details. After Breaker Falls, we're ready for skybeams and to dispatch some villains because it's getting awfully crowded on the bad guys and gals front. Our heroes, Papa and I, are happy for all the help we can get. So, JC, if it's not too much trouble, could you send us some help? Hurry, because there's a monster on our tail, and I'd like someone to take it out now, please. Love and hugs. Ran, son of Sarn, writing on behalf of the cast of the Breaker series and our scribe, Melinda K. Imperiled by promises. Be careful what you promise. Even the best intentions can demand more than you can give. Magic might be stronger when it's broken, but the promises Sarn forged with them are even stronger. In the 5th book of the Breaker series, all his promises come due, and Sarn must satisfy them all. Serving more than one master is not only damned near impossible without magic, it's also deadly. But Sarn doesn't have a choice. He must keep them all despite the monsters chasing him. The promises won't let him break them, not even to save those he loves. Clean fantasy goes epic in this action-packed thrill ride. For Carolyn K., keeper of the only promise that matters. Rest in peace, sis. Sorry this book is more than 2 months late. Life got in the way. The price of free will. Now. Farewell for now, my friends. JC touched the pile of broken stones, separating him from Sarn and his son. They were good people who'd done more than enough. I won't imperil them any further. JC. Ran called. The tyke wasn't ready to give up just yet. Neither was his father. Rocks grated as they slipped and slid. Sarn must still be trying to break through, but he couldn't while his magic was bound by the question. I didn't realize how young he is. I needed to get inside those menhirs and their cordon, and Sarn was the only way in. Then he offered to help me, and I couldn't say no. He and his son were so earnest. JC sighed. Of course, Sarn's habit of hiding under deep hoods had helped scale his age up. So had his brilliant green eyes. Their constant glow had highlighted the scar bracketing his left eye and left much of his face in shadow, adding to the effect. Oh well, what was done, and they were clear of it now. Those helpful rocks blocked their way. JC patted them in thanksgiving and turned, grateful for their presence. Now to deal with the adversary and his latest scheme. And on the way, meet a mortal who'll volunteer to help me because the covenant granted mankind self-determination. So those were the rules of engagement, rules he died to uphold. You can tempt mortals all you like, my adversary, but I died to ensure you could never make them do your will. They must choose who they follow. And that thought made JC smile because the adversary still didn't understand the full measure of what his most precious blood had purchased for mankind. Neither did most mortals, but one day they would. So JC lifted his cross and headed toward the echoes coming from somewhere ahead. He stumbled as those voices grew to a deafening roar. So many cried out for help, too many to count as their faces flashed before his eyes. He tried to locate them, but he couldn't get a fix on their location or what was happening. Their pain slammed into him, and he teetered as his cross swelled from the weight of their terror. It threatened to crush him. Overwhelmed by their pain, JC dropped to his knees and choked on their tears, but he could do nothing to stop what was happening. That was the price of their free will. He could just be a comforting presence reaching out of the darkness to embrace the hurt and the dying, and a voice calling the just to stop the slaughter. Dimly he was aware of footsteps and the cold ground under his hands and knees as he crawled. Blood ran down his face as thorns pricked his forehead. Nails punched through his hands and feet, but he kept going because he must. Light flared around him, then voices echoed from somewhere close by, or maybe he was slipping away to be with his people in their time of need. Something flew past his head, then JC heard a curious voice on a different frequency than humans used. There were other sentient races sharing this land, but they usually hid when he was about. "You're hurt. I'll fetch friend, Nulthar. He'll fix you," said the creature as it flapped away. "I'm sorry, but I can't wait for your friend. They're calling from a pit that became their tomb. I must roll away the stone and freed them, so they can fly to my Father in heaven." Blood welled from the holes in his palms and dripped on the ground as JC pushed to a stand. He held fast to the wall, and his bloody fingers found every crack and crevice that could serve as a handhold. Under his sandals, the mountain groaned. It had sensed his presence and was now waking up to the dangers stalking its uncounted miles of tunnels. "Sleep, friend, your turn has not yet come. I pray it never does." At his words the mountain stilled, and it drifted back into dreams of the days of old, when mages summoned mountains to fight for them. With a heavy heart, JC put his back to the rubble pile, and the allies' thing had gone to fetch. It was too dangerous for them. Tentacles snaked across the ground, pawing over everything in their path, while others probed the middle distance. Each tentacle moved with a purpose independent of its mates. How far did that independence extend? Was each tentacle driven by a separate mind, or were there multiple monsters controlling groups of them? "What are you searching for? Can you sense me?" In case they could, JC passed them with care and hoped Sarn and his son found somewhere safe to hold up until the adversary was contained. Defeating that beast must be his priority. As he shuffled along, a black mist lapped at his sandal-shod feet, seeking elemental magic to eat. Since his magic was divine rather than tied to any one world, it should have done nothing more than hide the ground and the tentacles feeling around for prey. Instead, that rising fog sucked at his feet and slowed his steps. "My power comes from belief. You can't take my power." But that fog was taking something he needed just as much, the energy to move. He wasn't here as a spirit but in a body. Unfortunately, bodies needed rest and sustenance. Two things JC had deprived it of because he'd been too busy chasing after the adversary. That deprivation was now taking its toll and making him vulnerable to the colloidal black thing climbing up his quivering legs. With his body so depleted, it would take too long to navigate the tunnels between himself and the adversary. But all other ways are closed to me. So he lifted his cross and tottered onward toward the trapped souls, calling his name. "I will ransom you, my people. Don't lose heart." For that is how the adversary sneaks in. Call in the guards. "I think that worked a little too well," Iraine said wryly as she flattened herself against the wall beside Nulthar to keep from getting trampled. She would have melted into the shadows thanks to her dark complexion, if a collection of religious symbols weren't glowing on her skin. Those marks of faith had prevented her from turning into a mindless drone, so they were a boon even though they made her conspicuous in the dark. All the guards with Nulthar glowed with symbols, some due to their own faith and some because he'd marked them with runes against mental coercion, like the one he bore. But his rune was under his clothes, because his mother had inscribed it on his base chakra at birth with indelible ink. Nulthur fiddled with the curvy pendant hanging over his heart. It was the old rune for dawn, and its light was fast fading because he had no magic to fuel it with. You think? Under the sweat and stinking grime, Nulthur caught a familiar scent and sneezed. Are you carrying pepper? So what if I am? Arain winked, and Nulthur shook his head. Only Arain would carry spices around with her. Though in the past, those spices had come in handy, especially the salt and capsaicin. At least we freed them, she said. Are you sure that was us? Hawaiian shouted over the screaming denizens, running all out for their lives. Holy water is some powerful stuff, but only in the hands of a true religious, and I'm just a guard. He ducked his head though, whether that was out of discomfort over discussing his religious beliefs in the middle of a supernatural crisis, or to better protect his bare head, Nulthur couldn't tell in the uncertain light. All he had was a dim glow of the symbols that shone on the breasts or foreheads of his people, and others caught up in the hysterical flow of the mob. But his subordinate had brought up an important point. You think someone else freed them? Not a question, just a statement touching on a rather frightening fact. Who has that power? Do I even want to know? Yes, he needed to know, but just what was he supposed to do with the answer? Congratulate the man. Why does everything in this place swing toward the magical side of the spectrum? Why can't only mundane problems fall into my lap? Nulthur rubbed his shoulder. It still smarted from when that bearish man had slammed into him. Begging your pardon, sir, but there's only one man who could do that, our Lord and Savior. What are you saying? Lurston asked. He sounded less groggy, though he kept rubbing at the rune Nulthur had traced on him. Are you saying he's here? Nulthur caught Lurston by his wrist. Stop it. That rune cut you loose from whatever was controlling you. Until we know more about what's going on, leave it in place. That's an order, Corporal. Yes, sir, Lurston said in resignation. Look, I just call him like I see him, and what we saw is only possible for one man. Hawaiian shrugged and slunk deeper into cover, such as it was. What if he's right? Arain asked right before she darted into the stampede. Arain. What the hell are you doing? Arain. Agalthar echoed his shout, but the lithe woman didn't acknowledge either of them as she vanished into the crowd. Did that voice get her? I don't hear it. Do you? Nulthur scanned the crowd for Arain's dark head, but she was gone. He hurtled over the boulder he'd been sheltering behind and nearly crashed into his best friend as Arain appeared with 3 men in tow. Nulthur smiled as a 4th guard linked up with them, then a 5th. His squad was now 12 members strong, but the 5 guards trailing Arain weren't sporting any glowing sigils, religious or otherwise. What had happened to that dark voice and the compulsion it had cast? Perhaps we silenced it. Drea saluted smartly as she hopped onto the boulder. Sir. I thought you were on leave, Corporal. I was, but now seemed like a good time to return to active duty. So when Sven's squad passed my door, I joined up. I can always go back on leave after the current crisis is over. What my sister-in-arms means is that she was bored to tears at home with the kids and couldn't wait to escape them. Arain slung an arm around the other woman's shoulders. Drea just smiled. Some people joined the guards because the guards were always hiring, and some joined because they craved adventure. Regular paychecks and the opportunity to save people were additional bonuses. Then there was the last group, women, and men like him who joined to uphold law and order. Sven's down here too? Nulthur asked. Other than Drea and Yazzie, the rest were all part of his squad, which was still 2 guards short of its original complement. With luck, they were making their way to the nearest guard post to report in. Gare nodded and pointed to his mate, a lumbering giant named Yazzie who loved to shoot things. The former ranger had transferred to the guards after an incident in the enchanted forest. An incident he'd refused to discuss despite the rampant curiosity of his fellow guards. Yazzie is in his squad. We found each other in the crush, Gare explained. Yes, but we lost others. They just tranced out and walked away from their posts. I've never seen such a thing before. It was beyond eerie. Yazzie shuddered, and Gare patted his arm. How did you end up here? Where was Sven when you last saw him? Agalthar asked as he climbed over a collapsed column to join them. I don't know, Drea said. One minute I'm following Yazzie and listening to a particularly bad joke. And the next, a wall of screaming people are coming toward me. I had no choice but to run. So, you ran into my back. Yazzie shot her in a grieved look. How do you know that was me? It's awfully dark down here. It could have been anyone. So, neither of you know where the rest of Sven's squad is? No. Where were you right before you were here? We were descending a staircase into the lower quarters, right? Yazzie glanced at Drea, who nodded. That's how I remember it, though I'd love to know what happened in between then and now. No, you don't. Trust me on that, Lurston said, and Arain mimed throwing a rock at him. Before Nulthar could digest everything he'd just heard and formulate a plan, he felt a familiar presence touch his mind. Nulthar raised his fist, and Thing dropped onto it. Claws bit into the leather of his padded gauntlet as his little friend settled. The Shining One needs help, friend Nulthar, Thing broadcasted, making everyone jump. His psychic pet/flatmate was a mishmash of mammals with a bit of owl thrown in the mix to give the mostly harmless creature wings, and the ability to turn his head 180 degrees, so his large, dark-adjusted eyes could plead with Nulthar and his squad simultaneously. What's a Shining One? Arain clambered over the rocks in time to scratch Thing's furry belly, and his little friend squirmed with pleasure. He's here, Hawine said in a reverent tone. We have to help him, Captain. Help who? I don't see anyone besides us and that crowd. Drea steadied herself on Yazzie's broad shoulders and shook her head before dismounting. You must help him, the Shining One. I will if I can. Nulthar tossed Thing back into the air, and his odd little friend took wing. Nulthar glanced at the crowd. He was torn between staying and going. I need to know what they're running from. It was his duty to guard them. But the Shining One needs you, Thing said into his mind alone, tearing him further. The crowd bunched up as it pushed into the tunnel feeding into this cavern, and echoes of falling rocks almost drowned out their screams. Everyone stay down while we figure out what's going on, Nulthar ordered. His squad hunkered down amid the rubble at the widest point in this cavern. Behind their position, the crowd desperately tried to exit. Everything in front of them was lost in deep shadows. Anything could be hiding in there. We must do something. Arain touched his arm. Agreed, but if we wade into that panicked crowd, we'll get trampled, and that won't help anyone. We need a better plan than that, Agalthar said. I second that. Though, Arain didn't like it any more than Nulthar did. She joined the guards to make a difference and to get official sanction to beat up the bad guys and gals. Lately, there had been a troubling upswing in the numbers of ladies taking up deadly professions like murder. What that said about society as a whole, Nulthar didn't dare speculate on, especially not while in Arain's company. The Shining One, Thing muttered as he flew in tight, agitated circles within the glow of Nulthar's pendant. The dawn rune was the brightest light down here, but its nimbus contracted a little more every moment they lingered. The echoes of large, heavy things crashing into each other intensified. Was whatever lay beyond this point collapsing? Could the whole place be coming down? No, surely that wasn't possible. Those Lithurians built their strongholds to last through the ages. Parts of it might fall, but not the whole thing. Magic isn't the only thing holding it up. If they were still under the stronghold inside Mount Eredrin, they might not be anymore. Nulthur had gotten so turned around over the last few hours, he had no idea where exactly they were right now. Nor was the rolled-up map in his pocket any use until he could cast a location rune, run into a landmark or question a native, because he'd used the rest of his personal store of power to shield his most vulnerable guards from that fell voice earlier. "Anyone know where we are?" Nulthur asked, not really expecting a response. "Under the mountain," was the sarcastic reply from Gare of all people, but he ignored it. Yazi's husband had boundless patience and good cheer usually, but Gare was worried he and his mate might not escape this alive. It was clear in his slanted black eyes, so Nulthur cut him some slack. Besides, Gare was an old friend from his prison guard days. "What is that?" Drea pointed, but Nulthur just shook his head as a dark blur shot through the darkness ahead and to the right. At least it was nowhere near the slow-moving crowd. He was grateful for that. He'd seen enough death today. But they thronged the only exit leaving Nulthur and his guards to face this new threat. "Whatever it is, it's fast," Agalthar said. It wasn't Thing because Nulthur felt the wind of his little friend's passage from behind and to his left and heard his alarm chirping. That dark blur crashed into something hard, and the telltale sound of rocks striking more rocks, or the cave floor in this case, resounded. Something was trying to break through. And we might be in the way. Bang. The thing struck again and again. Is it hammering against a wall? Nulthur wished the entire right side of the cavern wasn't blanketed in deep shadows, so he could at least guesstimate how close that thing was to them, and what lay between it and them. "Anyone have a light?" Agalthar asked, "Anyone other than our captain?" "No offense, but I don't think we should risk our only light source. Or their captain, because the rune light wouldn't work for anyone else." It was another gift keyed to Nulthur alone. A chorus of no's greeted that question. "We all had some, but our Lumir crystals went dark, and haven't turned back on again," Hawine said. "Why is that?" Yazi asked. "I think I missed that part. Like Drea, there are some puzzling holes in my memory." "Mine too," Gare said as he thumped his lover on the back. All three of them had been enthralled by that voice and the thing that had been flying around earlier. So it wasn't surprising that they had a few gaps in their memories. "Not me though, I got to experience all the weirdness firsthand thanks to this." Nulthur rubbed the rune on his belly through his uniform shirt and grimaced at the dirt stains marring the blue fabric. That rune was another gift from his overbearing mother. I should probably thank her for it. Without its protection, I'd have become a blank-eyed mute shuffling along to another creature's will. No thank you once was enough. And he still had nightmares about that one time. It was the reason he'd parted ways with his family, his heritage and all but the most benign uses of magic. Well, there was this black fog that rolled over us. It snuffed out all our Lumir stones, Lurston said, but that was hours ago. Right, that was then, but this is now. Why hasn't their glow returned? All eyes turned to Nulthur, including Iraine's, which surprised him. Why do they think I know the answer? Still, he gave it his best shot. Because there's no more magic in them to sustain their glow. Whatever that fog was, it eats magic. But what did it do with that magic once it ate it? I wish I knew, because it would be very handy right now if we stumbled upon a pool of magic or something I can drain so I can get a few rune lights going. Nulthur clasped his hands together to keep from touching the other runes written on his skin. None would help in this situation. Bang, 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 crash, that thing had broken through something, a wall, hopefully not the ceiling. Nulthar pulled Arain down with him. Please, not another monster. One supernatural entity on the loose is enough. Everyone take cover. From what? Arain shot him an aggrieved glare. Monsters. Thing broadcasted. Can you see what it is and what it's doing? Nulthar stayed low and retreated as more rocks fell. They were closer and louder than before. They kicked up a dust cloud, and it rolled over them, choking him. Nulthar coughed as he waited for Thing's reply. Please, let that adorable amalgamation's dark adjusted eyes see something I can't. You owe me one, fate. Yes, it has many arms. Many arms? What does that mean? Lurston or maybe Yazzie shouted. Between the dust and the dim light of the symbols glowing on some of his fellow guards, it was hard to tell who'd spoken. Just what he said. Look there. Arain pointed to a blur sliding through the shadows, but Nulthar couldn't make out anything more about it than its snaky shape. They're pulling down the wall to get to the Shining One. Go, friend Nulthar, go to the Shining One. Where is he? Arain gripped his shoulder. I see him. He's there. She pointed at something to their right, and Nulthar spotted a glimmer of light off in the distance. She patted his shoulder as she stepped out of cover, holding out her glowing arms. Numerous religious icons glowed on them, but their light was just barely enough to illuminate her face. One of those things swiveled around and lunged at her, but she dodged. Follow me. Lead the way, Thing. Yes, go to the Shining One. Thing screeched and swooped down on the dark blur, targeting Arain with his claws extended. He raked them across the snaky appendages, pummeling what must be a wall, and they twisted, about to swat him. Somehow, they'd sensed his presence. Perhaps they, too, had eyes. Thing flew in a wide loop to draw some of those arms away from the rock Arain had just scaled. She vanished at its apex, and darkness swallowed her. Go now, while it's distracted. Won't it just follow us if it's really after that Shining One? That's the general idea. Now go. Nulthar shoved Anthony toward the light and what he hoped was a hole in the wall. Thing's heroics left them an opening and bought them time to reposition. If Anthony survived, he'd probably quit the guards. And I wouldn't blame him if he did. He picked a hell of a week to sign on with us. Nulthar dodged one of the creature's many arms and vaulted over another one that shot by at ankle height. How many arms did this monster have? It seemed to have a limitless supply. Where was the rest of its body? Thing made another pass as something heavy slammed Nulthar to the ground. Footsteps approached while he struggled to free himself. Keep going. Get out of here. I'll join you later. But Captain. That's an order, Lieutenant. Will you bring me up on charges if I decline? Agalthar grunted and thrust his hands under the object pinning Nulthar. Between his prying and Nulthar's squirming, Nulthar finally extricated himself. Thanks, now get out of here. Nulthar shoved Agalthar toward the rock pile. What about you? Don't worry about me. I'm more durable than I look. Nulthar waved to his friend to go, then called to Thing and headed back into the fray. He didn't check to see if his friend had followed his orders this time. His rune light wasn't bright enough to illuminate the rock pile underfoot with its fading light until he bent to pick up a head-sized stone. When he rose, its light fell on the dark blur just inches away to his right. The thing was swiveling about in search of Thing until his rune light fell on it, revealing a slimy gray tube as wide as his leg. That tube ended in a grabby leaf-shaped thing, covered with suckers and chitinous hooks. Nulthar ducked as it swung around, then he smashed a rock into it. Another arm slammed into his back, and he tumbled through the hole that creature had made. It was just big enough to accommodate him, and he hit the ground hard on the other side. He gained his feet in time to avoid Drea, who'd leapt through after him, followed by Yazzie, Gare and Lurston. Things shot past them. Hurry, the Shining One's hurt. Now you tell me. Nulthar clenched his fists. Just what he needed, a wounded Shining One, whatever that was, to carry around with him down here. Because monsters and evil mind enslaving creatures aren't enough. Where are the others? Over here, Hawine called from just ahead. There's another tunnel up ahead. Indeed, a soft glow radiated from around that bend. It was the cross glowing on Huwain's heart. Nulthar gave the cavern one last glance, then ran to catch up to his men as rocks rained down on the place he'd just been standing. Those tentacles must have pulled down the wrong stones, or maybe they were the right ones, since a wall of rubble now separated them from a monster and a whole lot of innocent people. Damn you, fate. Nulthar turned his back on it because there was nothing more he could do for them, except get his men and women out of there alive. Gare stopped him. What if that creature follows us? Better us than that crowd of innocent people. Nulthar patted his subordinate's back and gave him a push to get him moving. A rumble shook the rock pile, dislodging some of the smaller stones. Looks like you'll get your wish, Captain. Then let's lead this thing on a merry chase. There's got to be some open ground we can lure it onto. Then the shooting begins. Yazzie patted the crossbow strap to his back as he and Nulthar jogged to catch up with the others. It was time to find this Shining One and get some answers. Rocks and Ripples Redix. Where are we going? Ren regarded Sarn from where he rested in his arms. To find out which tunnels are passable, then we'll see what our options are. Hopefully, we're not trapped with that tentacular horror show again. If they were, he'd need one hell of a plan to keep them safe. One thing at a time. I can't access my head map anymore. Or can I? Sarn skidded to a halt. Pebbles ricocheted into the shadows announcing his presence, but he ignored them. How did I know to turn right instead of left back there? Is my map part of my mind or my magic? Sarn wavered. Part of him wanted to find out and to finally answer the one question that had haunted him all his life. Am I human? Is my son? Instances where he'd gone above and beyond what any ranger could do flashed through his mind. Like his 30-mile run through a maze of killer trees, or the cave and he survived at 13, or that 1,000-foot fall he'd limped away from with just a bad sprain. And those were just a few of the highlights that rushed past. There were many, many more, and they all asked the same question. How much of that was magic, and how much was me? And more importantly, what did Ren inherit from me? Now was his chance to get a definitive answer if he dared. Ren rested his head on Sarn's shoulder, breaking the deadlock. I must find out for my son's sake. But there was no way back from that. Once he found out, it could change everything. Papa, are you okay? You're just standing around staring at rocks. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just trying to decide something that'll affect you. Or would it? No matter what I discover, Ren is still my son and my guiding light. Nothing can change that. So why was he still standing there balking, while a creature the size of a fortress destroyed parts of his home? What are you deciding? Whether I really want to know how much of what I do is because of the magic, and how much is because I'm not like other people. Ran said something, but all Sarn could hear was Inari's voice. You're not a freak. You're just unique, she'd said a month or so ago. It felt like so much longer, and the words felt strange in Sarn's mouth as he repeated them without meaning to. Ren shifted in his arms. You say that like being unique is a bad thing. Is it? I've always thought so. I wanted to be like everyone else, not different from them. Is that what unique means? I think so. The dull thud of falling rocks echoed in the shadowed gloom of the tunnel. Which way was it coming from? Sarn listened hard, but he couldn't tell, not with his hearing diminished in one ear. There were too many miles of naked stones for those echoes to bounce off. I've never had a chance to discover just how much of my uniqueness is magical and how much isn't, but we're about to find out. Because their lives now depended on those skills, and Sarn had a feeling he'd need every lesson Nolo and the other rangers had ever taught him. I hope they'll be enough to get us both out of here alive. Forget the whole human/non-human conundrum. Survival must be his sole focus right now. Okay, I like being unique. But can we be unique somewhere else? I don't like it here. Ren shivered. Nor was this a safe place to have an identity crisis. The wall to their left shook to emphasize that. The Eldar had either found them or they hadn't gotten far enough away from its extra long tentacles. Time to fix that. Cracks proliferated across the wall, outracing Sarn. A black fog pushed through them and coalesced on the ground. The magic eater is back, Ren said into his collar. Yes, it is. That's not a good sign. As Sarn rushed around a bend, Ren shifted so neither his little body nor the bear he hugged blocked their only light source. The crystal pendant glowed white, soothing his sun, and it reminded Sarn of what he'd lost. Without his eyes drenching everything in green light, this tunnel had a pronounced magenta tint, and it was a whole lot darker than he was used to. In fact, everything was, making him feel like he was stumbling through a half-remembered dreamscape. The more Sarn thought about it, the more it seemed part of his map might still be there because something was nudging him along. Ahead, a tentacle wrapped around a stalactite and tugged. Its wide base cracked, but the stalactite didn't fall. Sarn stuck close to the opposite wall and gave it a wide berth just in case. He checked the way ahead. It was clear for the next 100 paces, so he closed his eyes and flipped that familiar mental switch to engage his head map. He tripped over something but kept his eyes closed, fearing the worst. What if it's not there? What if I'm truly walking blind now? But he wasn't. Something tugged his foot a little to the left to avoid an obstacle he couldn't see. And this direction felt right, like he was on course. He almost hadn't noticed because the feeling was so normal. How are you supposed to see monsters with your eyes closed? Ren asked. That's why I have you. You're my spotter. If you see any, shout. That's not funny. I know. I'm just tired and worried we'll get lost down here without my map. It's gone. Sarn nodded and opened his eyes. White lines traced familiar routes over his field of view. No icons appeared, just a handful of symbols marking places like his cave, the staircases he often used, the pools where he'd taught his son to swim, the foundling's cave, and so on. Everything his magic had ever mapped appeared in all its detailed glory, but it was static now without his magic feeding it a constant stream of information. It's back, isn't it? You have that look. What look? Ren just smiled. Sarn let that subject go as he zoomed in on an area of his map that looked like a match for their current location. He'd kept careful track of the turns they'd taken and approximated the distance. Unfortunately, he couldn't know for certain if his guess was correct since his map didn't update to display his whereabouts or, oh fates, no. Murren. What about Uncle Murren? Is he here? Ren looked around until a loud bang startled him. I keep forgetting about him. He must have descended to the lower quarters by now. And I have no way to find him without magic. Sarn stepped over a pile of refuse, and an overripe apple rolled out. He felt like that apple without his magic, soft and easily harmed. At least I still have my map and a rough idea of where we are. It was a start and something he could build on, but not right now. Can we find Uncle Murren later? Wren asked in a small voice almost drowned out by the padding of many feet. Those echoes grew louder with every breath. Sarn squeezed his eyes tight shut until he remembered they no longer glowed, just as pendant. Sarn opened his eyes. His map was still there, sitting right below the level of thought where it had always lived. But it didn't have any information about the crowd, nor did it prove anything conclusively, so the question lingered in the back of his mind, am I human? Echoes of screams drowned out his paranoia. He could sort out his humanity later. In his arms, Wren cringed. I know you don't like darkness. I don't like it either, but I need you to cover the light. So they don't take it away. Wren touched the crystal, but he couldn't bring himself to cover it. Yeah. Light's a commodity down here, one worth fighting for. Let's not tempt them, okay? Scared people don't act rationally. Dangerous talks. Inside the enchanted forest. No, you're going the wrong way. Snake Woman dug her claws into the rock, hiding her. For some reason, it muted the black Lumiere crystal's influence. Maybe because they were both essentially rocks. It didn't matter, because she must keep up with those orange-robed fools. Where are you going? How can I get you to go in the opposite direction? Snake Woman scanned the understory for another boulder. Shayari had tons of them, so she spotted a likely candidate and dove behind it. Gray tendrils wrapped around the tree standing beside her hiding spot, and its enchantments withered away. She hunkered down as that same shadow scraped at the non-magical rock and skittered away, searching for more magic. Oh, no you don't. I'm not some tasty snack. She dragged a blanket over her. Overlapping metal discs polished to a high sheen were sewn into the fabric. All magics were light-based and reflective. Hopefully, so was Black Lumiere. Just breathe, suffocation isn't part of the plan, Snake Woman told herself as magic's antithesis rolled over the mirrored blanket. It should reflect those magic nullifying rays. If it didn't, she'd be in serious trouble because she was made of magic. It was the glue holding her conglomerate body together. What if that black crystal severs all those bonds in one fell swoop? Can I survive that? Snake Woman fought down the panic squeezing her chest. Voices heartened her. Were those lunatics taking a break? Box that devil's rock up so I can see what you're doing. You know, there's an easier way than this unless you enjoy crawling around on your belly. Who are you? But she already knew before the question had popped out of her mouth, the adversary. Who else would be following the devil's rocks but the devil or one of his prized henchmen? Her fangs clicked into place, and she gathered her legs under her, ready to spring. She was no one's goon. But you're still locked out. He shrugged. So? I can still whisper, and that's all I'm doing now, whispering. There's no harm in listening. Snake Woman pushed back the blanket. Indeed, the shadows draining the magic from the ground and everything around them bent away from the hooded man in billowing black robes. Or was that an illusion? After all, he was the father of lies. What plans? Never mind. Yonder seeker is supposed to take her rock and go away from Mount Eredrin, not toward it. There's enough black Lumiere loose under there. I don't need any more. If I chose to listen, what would you whisper? Would you ask me to lure her away? As if I could, I don't have anything she wants. But that cleric had something Snake Woman wanted. Do I want it badly enough to make common cause with the devil? Every fiber of her being screamed at Snake Woman to run away, but she remained crouched with the reflective blanket draped over her back. Going against Vanya had been ill-advised. Going against the adversary was suicidal. And she valued her hide. but she'd never passed up an opportunity to get what she wanted. Snake Woman shifted the blanket. She unfastened a row of hooks to reveal a hole in its middle just large enough to poke her head through, so she could wear the whole mirrored affair poncho style, giving her greater range of movement. It left her head exposed, but she needed to see to stay on course and plan. For everything, there's a price. What would you give for the advice I offer? And there it was. The one thing even a demon-made construct like her feared, the devil's bargain. Do I dare deal with the adversary? Do I even have a choice? How about this, he said, seeing her apprehension. I'll trade you one piece of information for one favor I can call in later. I promise you'll like the favor. It's something you already want to do. Snake Woman cocked her head to one side and thought. Her knees were cramping from all the crawling and creeping she'd been doing since she'd recompiled herself. I don't need your help. What I want most is within my grasp. In fact, it was getting away, but that was a minor detail. A child could follow the path of destruction those seekers left in their wake. But getting that crystal from them would be harder than she'd thought. It liked to eat magic, and she was made of magic. But I just need it for less than a minute if I can steer those psychos to the right cave. Surely her mirror-inlaid poncho would protect her for the minute it would take to dash out of range. What if I'm wrong? Snake Woman shook her head. I'll take that chance rather than encumber myself with another obligation. Are you certain? Yes, find another ear to whisper in. I need to do this myself. She needed to prove she was an independent entity and no longer the creature the demon veil had created. Her claws dug into her palms, leaving dents, but no wounds because she was not flesh and blood. She shook out her fists and flexed her fingers. Maybe he understood. Maybe he too was a contrivance pretending to a humanity he'd never owned. Or maybe the black Lumiere crystal's presence was addling her mind. The adversary gave her a one-shouldered shrug. Have it your way. If you change your mind, call me. He vanished, and an object dropped to the ground. The white game piece compelled her to pick it up. She ran her thumb over the groove delineating the horse's head from its neck. It was the knight piece, but she felt more like a pawn now. Damn him for that. What game are you playing? She asked the space the adversary had occupied, but he didn't answer. The chess piece warmed as the black Lumiere crystal's influence rolled over her, muting its draining effect. Strength flowed into her, energizing her tired muscles. For the first time since she'd met up with these fanatics, Snake Woman felt like herself. But at what cost? Did I just accept his bargain by accepting his gift? The devil's in the details. As Snake Woman crept toward that crazy cleric and her acolytes, the adversary disengaged from the wraith formerly known as Dirk. If that snaky construct did even half of what she intended, she'd further his plans. But there was still a chance she'd screw up even though she'd accepted his gift, so he left a shadow of himself crouched in the back of Dirk's mind. After all, Dirk had proven he was expendable, and no creation was truly trustworthy away from its master. Through his shadow self, he could take control of his servant when the time was right. Snake Woman would accept his offer in the end. No one could refuse him for long, not when accepting would prolong her life. Her sense of self-preservation will win her to my side. It's inevitable. And I'll be on hand to strike that bargain the moment she realizes that. The adversary turned his thoughts back to Mount Eredron, where he'd left his latest simulacrum, but he didn't return to it. He couldn't execute the next stage of his plans until Aralor turned away from Mount Eredron and took her black Lumiere crystal elsewhere. I need more wraiths on this plane of existence. Why couldn't you have 5 friends instead of 4, Dirk? The adversary shook his head as his vulture-winged creation circled a crude litter. Aside from the extra long wings, Dirk was still man-shaped. Shadows veiled his old face, giving him the anonymous appearance all wraiths bore. But even he looked better made than that litter. It was hastily lashed together from dead branches stripped of their enchantments, as if that could offer its bearers any protection. Stupid mortals, you're so quick to trust in material things. Like that white box bursting at its seams, it perched on the seeker's swaying platform. Inside it, a black lumiere crystal sucked in all magic within its reach, but that reach kept expanding both on the mortal plane and no doubt beyond it. That was a concern. How long before it could reach into the immaterial realms and steal their power? Only God knew what that vile crystal did with the magic it ate. Not even the adversary could peer into its black heart. It was another damned blind spot courtesy of his long-ago fall. Perhaps that's why that black gem bothered him so much, it reminded him of what he'd lost. I was the morning star, first among angels, a warrior prince in the ranks of the Almighty. Before the war in heaven, he'd kept the secrets of the universe. But the one king had stripped him of those secrets before tossing him into a lake of fire and abandoning him there to complete his transformation into the adversary. But only fools acted in ignorance when all signs, or in this case crystals, pointed to caution. I was a fool for God once, but no longer. Better to be the spider spinning the web than the fly caught in it. Because that's what he was now, a weaver of lies and seducer of mortals. Traps within traps, that's what that crystal was, but who would it trap? The black lumiere crystal, in the cleric's keeping, wasn't behaving like its brethren, in the pit under Mount Eredron. What was different about it? This one was swollen with power, and still pulling in more through the cracks in the containment field worked into the box, partially enclosing it. The next expansion wave would free the stone and the hungry void within it, if that's what it even was. He felt the forces of chaos gathering around that crystal. All 11 orange-robed fanatics had to carry it because each time that stone expanded, its mass increased. Their flimsy litter couldn't shield them from that crystal's magic, nullifying effects. They must be feeling it, but they showed no outward sign of it to his servant watching them from far above. Black beams swept out of that growing gap between box and lid and slammed into the enchanted trees standing boldly in the seeker's path. They shriveled up and fell, adding more gray lifeless husks to the ones already littering the magicless area for at least a mile around them. Dust to dust, all that rises rots, the adversary said, wondering where the queen of all trees was. Why aren't you saving your precious forest, Queenie? Are those your orders? Asked his wraith. No, just an observation. Widen your circuit. I don't want you caught up in that. The adversary waved to the darkening cone of the twister vacuuming up the magic in this area. None of the seekers could see it, nor would they care if they could. Is that what you're doing, Queenie? Watching the destruction of your forest from a safe distance? Perhaps she wasn't as indestructible as she'd claimed. Where are you really, Queenie? Why aren't you stopping this? Because she was supposed to. That had been the whole point of handing that black gem to Aralor. The cleric's narrow mind combined with her hatred for all things magical had made that clash inevitable. All I did was even the odds for that girl. But the queen of all trees hadn't taken the bait. That powerful psychopomp was still out there, and she had the power to liberate the souls he'd captured. What are you planning, Queenie? What could be more important than saving your precious trees? Not her mage Ling, or she'd be here protecting him from my influence. Perhaps she still thinks he's hidden from my eyes. I can't wait to see her reaction when she finds out I have my claws in him and soon his son too. What else was worth protecting in this country? I'll find her, Master. Don't bother. I need your eyes on that priestess and that snake creature. Report to me if they do anything interesting. It was time to withdraw and put another plan into motion before the queen of all trees bestirred herself. She had a nasty habit of appearing at the turn of the tide. And when she does, I'll have a surprise waiting for her. You have your orders. Yes, sir, Dirk replied. The adversary grimaced. Blind obedience had its drawbacks, but there hadn't been time to fashion a proper soldier, nor had that changed. The celestial clock was ticking down, and the window for cracking open his prison was dwindling as well. Good thing he was not but a spirit. Traversing the intervening miles, which were fewer than the adversary would have liked, took only a moment since he knew exactly where he needed to be. When the adversary opened his eyes, he regarded a ball of energy about 13 feet in diameter. It slowly revolved at the upper limits of a mile-wide cavern. The soul catcher anchored that glowing ball to the bottom of a pit that was roughly half the cavern's width. Working with a physical focus had its drawbacks, but there hadn't been any other choice except that mottled black and white chunk of Lumiere crystal. The soul trap was anchored to a closed system that didn't emit any magic at all. The imprisoned souls powered the trap, leaving nothing for the black Lumiere crystal to latch onto. But that damned fool Dirk didn't need to throw the soul catcher into the pit for it to do its job. And there it'll stay until I convince a mortal to retrieve it. Which isn't bloody likely while an unholy cross between a giant squid and a dragon is throwing a temper tantrum down there. I should have kept one of Dirk's cronies alive long enough to fetch that soul catcher. In fact, 2 of Dirk's friends were unaccounted for, Ragnus, whom he'd sent to find Gore, and Gore himself. Neither had checked in for quite some time. Chris and what's his name? It was something with a V, villain? Village. VR. Yes, that was it. VR and Chris guarded the soul ball, and that was it for Dirk's cronies. It really was too bad the man didn't have any more friends. The ravine shuddered, showering rocks into the pit. What the hell are you doing down there? You can't escape. A sacrifice holds you here. Only a willing sacrifice can release you, and you're not getting one. The Ageldar didn't respond, nor could the adversary see that damned creature when he hovered over the pit. That yawning opening was perhaps a half-mile across, maybe more, and twice as deep. Each time that thing pounded against the steep walls of its deep prison, it triggered a rock slide and widened the ravine. A black mist crawled out of the pit seeking magic to nullify, but there was none left except that luminous gray sphere hugging the ceiling, his soul trap. And it wouldn't be here for long, just until the Angel of Death collected the remaining souls he needed. Then he could break the first seal. The adversary gave the pit another glance. A cyclone twisted in its heart, funneling particles of magic down toward the exposed black Lumiere crystal, or crystals, below. Since that maelstrom ripped magic into its microscopic components, it was only visible in the magical spectrum and only just. Something down there was negating some of its influence, but that something couldn't block that rock forever. Maybe it was the Ageldar, or something about this place. After all, the Queen of all trees had locked both that beast and those magic-stealing rocks inside the pit, and she'd used magic to do it. Though more likely, it was a combination of things that had lined up just so to create the right conditions. Otherwise, she'd have contained Aralor's chunk by now instead of letting that cleric drag a second magic-eating cyclone behind her as she marched south toward Mount Eredrin. The adversary fumed. He was closer to freedom than ever before. All his pieces were on the board and moving. Some toward their intended goals and some, like the one called Sarn, were fighting against him. That made the adversary smile. Well, he'll come to heel in the end. They always do. No one can hold out against my influence forever. Especially not while your skin bears my mark. It's only a question of time before you break, Mageling. But it never hurt to stack the deck in his favor or apply a little pressure where it was needed. So the adversary stretched out his thoughts again, and his spectral body dissolved into a cloud of black motes. His mind was a dark anemone extending its shadowy tentacles, and his essence spread with them. They touched off ripples in the minds they passed, igniting dark passions and forbidden thoughts, breaking taboos and urging a knife to slash here, a fist to punch there and a hand to take, property or life. It didn't matter so long as that momentary flash of satisfaction lit up the mind he brushed. His feelers sucked away that tiny triumph because all pleasures were fleeting. Some more than others. What is life but a constant striving to fill the empty places in your soul and mine? That's what the adversary was, an empty void always hungry for more, always on the make or the take. Where are you, Mage Ling? Down in the pit, another creature also laughed, but not loud enough for its mirth to carry beyond the walls of its prison. Its back was armored in black, bony plates, which the Ageldar slammed against the walls of its prison, widening the cracks. It rose on its stubby forelegs and tilted its enormous body, as much as it was able to with its hindquarters crushed under a rock wall. But it was enough to expose more of the tentacles extruding from its scaly belly. Several dozens of them shoved through the cracks in the walls to search for a sacrifice to free it. But that move also exposed 7 matte black ovoids. Each stood as tall as a person. 6 others lay in pieces, and a black mist billowed up from them. The desiccated bones of the Ageldars, made partially, covered their last clutch. Time had decomposed those remains. You always did underestimate the lesser races and their deviousness. At least, you're still useful. The Ageldar gripped the head of its partially fossilized mate with its tentacles and ripped its head off. The rest of its mate's carcass had been buried under tons of rock long ago, and so were the remains of others of their kind. All that remained of their race on this plane were fossilized bones. Far above, the adversary's hooded simulacrum destabilized as that entity's attention drifted away from it and finally dissolved. The Ageldar waited another 10 minutes until it was certain the adversary would not return, then it launched the headrim ward. It sailed out of view and passed through the invisible chains holding the Ageldar's body here. After all, the sacrifice that penned the Ageldar only confined the living, not the remains of the dead, since the Queen of all Trees' mirrored shield was gone. So good of the adversary to remove that for me. Just ignore the monster in the pit whose brain is 8 times larger than yours, while I escape. The Ageldar's many sucker-covered arms thrust through another crevasse and felt along the tunnels for the bones of its captors. Their remains anchored the spell holding it hostage, but they were still out of reach. Meanwhile, the head had landed on the rim and rolled to a stop in a shadowed corner. Neither wraith hovering 30 feet above paid it any mind as they circled the sphere of soul energy they guarded. One of them carried the seeds of his destruction buried deep in the tattered remains of his twisted soul, and neither he nor his incorporeal master knew. I might be caged, but my long-extinct jailers left me all the tools I need to create a dystopian paradise with magic's antithesis. But the Ageldar had to get that antithesis out of the pit and away from its dampening effect. This little light. Sarn rounded a bend on a tunnel paralleling the collapsed one he'd just left and flattened himself against a wall. Ran was a silent, scared weight in his arms, but he held the boy tight, shielding him with his body as wild-eyed, screaming people pushed past. Thank fate, none were children, or they'd have been trampled in the mob's mad dash for safety. "Papa!" Ran cried in alarm. His small hands clutched Sarn's pendant, letting no light leak out. "Shush, it's okay. I've got you. We must wait for them to pass. It's too dangerous to do anything else." "I know, but Papa, they're still not right." "Not right, how?" Granted, Sarn could only catch occasional glimpses in the crush when a lucky soul passed by sheltering a guttering lantern or a candle burned down to the nub. The adversary's summons had caught people of all walks of life and professions mid-activity and moved them to his will. So, some had come with light sources to hand. The enchanted forest parked on 3 sides of this mountain fortress enforced its injunction against fire with extreme prejudice, but only within its confines. Mount Eredrin had never expressed a preference, nor was it enchanted. So an open flame wasn't a death sentence under the mountain, as it would be out there in the enchanted forest. But the lesser grades of Lumiere crystals were cheaper and required zero tending, so only the folks who needed a flame to do their work tended to have one. Apparently, there were a lot of people who worked such trades. Ran, hold my pendant up. But you said to hide it. I know, but I see lights in the crowd and no one's fighting over them. Everyone just wants to get away from the Age Eldar. I think it's safe to reveal it, and I need to see their faces. Still not swayed by his reasoning, Ren hesitated. Shadows veiled his pensive face. It'll be okay. Trust me. And if it's not? I don't need magic to run far and fast. Sarn smiled. No, his ranger training had seen to that, and he'd enjoyed every minute of it even when they'd blindfolded him and made him run the whole obstacle course again. Of course, he'd never tell either of his masters that. Ren nodded and relaxed his grip. White light streamed through his fingers, lighting the throng, but Sarn shook his head. He couldn't see what his son saw, and that thought shot a bolt of fear through his heart. Relax, Ren is just a kid, and kids are perceptive. He doesn't have magical gifts that differ from yours. Though at the moment Sarn had no magic at all. And if I don't get it back, how can I help my son if he inherits my magic? The question froze Sarn as that new and frightening reality sank in. The golem hadn't said Ran wouldn't inherit his power, just that the Lithirians had broken the link between eye color and magic. Certain conditions must now be met for the power to breed true. And I know nothing about my father. I could have inherited magic from him too. Sarn hugged his son. I can't believe I'm related to the Lithirians. The idea still boggled his mind. Papa? Ran gasped. Not so tight. Bear needs to breathe. And so do you. Sarn relaxed his grip a hair. When you said, they're not right, what did you mean? The throng still packed the tunnel, but it was slowing, making it possible for Sarn to go against it if he stayed close to the wall. You don't see the flames in them. Sarn shook his head. Oh, maybe you'll see them when you get your magic back. You're getting it back, right? I like playing with it. Sarn tripped over a body as his son echoed his inner child's testimony from the question. He freed a hand and checked for a pulse but stopped when he saw her throat was slashed. Turning away from the corpse, he searched for a safe place to put his son and settled for an outcropping at shoulder height. It was large enough for Ran to sit cross-legged on, so the boy did. Papa, why are we stopping? Look at the people going by. Tell me where you see those flames. What about the monster? There might be more than one loose down here. Sarn squatted by the dead girl and made certain his body blocked her from view. Her skin was still warm, which meant she'd died recently. How recently? As he rose, his pendant's light fell on 3 others, all boys in their late teens or early 20s like the girl, and himself too. Papa. Why are those people just lying there? Are they sleeping? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Tell me about those flames. Okay, but the sleeping people don't have any. Then who does? Everyone else. Ran waved at the crowd. Some have fires dancing on their heads and some are in their chests. But they're weak lights. There are some black squiggly things too. I don't like those. They make my head hurt. Can you brighten the little lights? I would if I could, but I don't know how. Oh, they make me sad. Why do they make you sad? Sarn glanced at his son. The crowd was dispersing at last, revealing more bodies. At least these new ones ranged in age, but their wounds were different. They weren't clean cuts to the jugular. Could the beast in the pit do that? How far could it reach? Or was he looking at a mundane murder amidst all this magical mayhem? Because they want to be big fires. Ran fingered Bear's sparkly bow. Can we go home now? Sarn sighed. Not yet, I still want to help JC. And now there were more dead who had no one to speak for them, except him, because he was the only one who'd stopped to look. Their surprised faces were stamped on his memory. Sarn left the dead behind because he had to, but the mystery of their deaths followed him. There might be a killer down here, and I don't have time to find him right now. But you need magic for that, Rand said, as Sarn scooped him up. How can you help JC without it? Because I can get near the black Lumiere crystals in the Age Eldar. At least, I think I can. At Rand's incredulous look, Sarn elaborated as he stepped over the dead. He hadn't meant to discuss that with his son, but the dead had rattled him. Thankfully, Rand's attention was riveted on him, and he didn't look down, not once until after they'd turned into another tunnel. I'm in limbo until I answer the question. Only one of my magics is gone, the one I use all the time. The green glowy one? Yes, that one's gone, but the other one's still there. It's just locked away by the question. If I'm right, the black Lumiere crystal can't touch that one until the question finishes, so it can't drain me anymore. I think I'm immune to it. And JC isn't. Sarn shrugged. I don't know. That's why I want to find him. Sarn, shouted a familiar voice as footsteps thundered behind them. Sarn turned and frowned at the man charging toward him. I've been looking for you. There's been some mighty strange things happening. Yurston puffed to a halt. I'm so glad I found you. Yurston's candle flickered as the black mist licked upward. He turned scared eyes on Sarn. It's coming this way, isn't it? That black stuff or something else. What did you do? Sarn stepped in close to the miner turned conman. Could Yurston also have helped the adversary? I didn't do anything, but oh my God, it was awful. Every sense screamed a warning. Get down. Sarn shouted as he ducked behind a rock formation. Shopping for demons. Gore surfaced for what felt like the 1000th time and braced himself. But this time when his head pushed through solid rock, no summons slammed into him. Oh, thank fate, because the whole duck and cover thing was getting annoying. Gore floated over a sea of tents. Why did I come here? Each time he defied his master, that defiance eroded a little more of his being, leaving him a bit ragged around the edges and momentarily befuddled until anger rescued him. Find me a demon, the adversary had said, and his last order made Gore's head ache as it repeated itself a few more times, setting the goal firmly in what was left of his mind. Oh right, I'm looking for a demon to help me slip my chains. And where better to check than the place where everything was for sale. Narrow aisles wound through the bazaar, and a smattering of shoppers browsed its offerings. Here and there, hawkers hawked their wares, but there was only a fraction of the usual contingent. How many people had reacted to the adversary's infernal call? How long have I been dodging him? There had to be more people who'd escaped that vile summons. Perhaps they'd all barricaded themselves in their caves like good little sheep. Gore licked his lips, feeling suddenly peckish, not for meat but for something else. What do wraiths eat? Not the food on offer. One whiff of the mystery meats for sale made his stomach churn. Could wraiths sicken like mortals from spoiled meat? Gore surveyed the market from where he floated over its stained tents. The smart denizens of the lower quarters had hunkered down in their caves. Only the brave and stupid conducted business, as if all hell wasn't breaking loose inside the mountain. But that was the charm of the low market. From the highest noble brat to the lowest slave, everyone passed through this place at least once, both as a buyer and a seller. The low market squatted in a mile-wide cavern near the grand staircase, connecting all the levels inside the mountain. It was miles away from the Ageldar and the devilry the adversary had planned. But everyone slips up at some point. And when he does, I'll escape his hold over me. But for now, he had a demon to find and an empty stomach to fill. Because everyone had something to sell, the low market had long ago spilled into neighboring caverns. Buyers entered the market in search of everything from groceries to black market items. Whatever your desire, from the banal to the bizarre, it was for sale at the low market's ongoing bazaar. And if it wasn't, there was always someone willing to acquire it for a price. Though a demon might be a tall order even for the low market's shadiest procurers. But first, he needed to find them. Where do those on the fringes of the occult congregate? Before the adversary had turned him into an undead thing, he'd never had any truck with that lot. So he didn't even know what to look for as he scanned the buyers and sellers for clues. Just looking at them made his mouth water. Maybe wraiths eat people. Gore shook his head to rid himself of the idea, but it just made him hungrier. Get answers first, then you can feed. The reek of burning fish caught in Gore's throat, and he coughed as a gangly old man passed by holding a smoking lantern. The coughing fit coupled with the graybeard's fishy odor momentarily distracted him from the hunger. Nor was that man the only one wandering around with an open flame. What happened to the Lumiere crystals? Gore scanned the columns, walls, and ceiling for those ubiquitous crystals, but their trademark glow was gone. Something had snuffed them out. Had all the Lumiere crystals under Mount Eredrin gone out as well? What could do that? A vague memory of a light winking out in a long, dark cavern flitted by. Before it escaped his grasp, he remembered searching for another crystal. That other crystal was important somehow, but he couldn't recall why. Perhaps it was tangled up in how he'd become what he was now, a lesser servant of an evil lord. Gore shook those non-productive thoughts away. Find a demon, then you can find out about that crystal. Plan in mind, Gore floated over the neat aisles until a flash of silver caught his eye. Bells jingled on the shimmering costume of a veiled girl shimmying her hips. Beside her, acrobats tumbled, twirled, and turned cartwheels to the bells sewn into their clothes. Hundreds of tinkling bells made up each costume, and each performer's bells were a different pitch. So, when they moved, they created their own accompaniment. The effect was dazzling in the firelight. Shadows flitted between the shoppers, but they gave those performers and the fire pit a wide berth. Interesting. I wonder if it's the bells themselves, their chiming, or the light reflecting off them, that's keeping the adversary's lesser servants at bay. Though, the spit roasting over that open flame and its smoke reduced some of the performance's charm and turned Gore's stomach. Still, he watched mesmerized by the show. He didn't notice some of his essence had dissipated into the smoke wafting past him, or the shadowy tentacles stealing through the market. Come sinner, let your dark desires rise, murmured the adversary, but his voice was muted by those silver bells. Gore added silver bells to his shopping list, then looked down at the wisps his legs had become and freaked out. He flew away from those bells and didn't stop until their song couldn't dispel him anymore. But he stayed just within earshot, so their song muted the adversary's call. He wasn't ready to face that creature yet. Angels and devils, that was close. A little longer, and I would have completely fallen apart. Who knew what would become of him, or where he would have ended up, if that had happened? Gore wiped his brow even though he wasn't corporeal enough to sweat. That familiar movement eased some of his distress as he took in the lines of stalls and the aisles wending between them. The adversary's last command thundered in his ears, "Find me a demon." How? They're not browsing around the low market waiting for work. Gore punched one of the tables, but his fist went right through it. Incorporeality sucked. So did that damned hunger. It was back and gnawing on his insides. Go sinners, do what your desires advise. A couple of hawkers, standing too far from those performers and their bells, stopped mid-spiel. The one wearing a feathered mask decked his competitor, sending the other man flying. All around the market, shoppers exploded into violence, all except the ones bearing luminous symbols on their heads or hearts. Those lucky few fled, wits intact, from the spreading violence egged on by that hateful voice. "You don't happen to know where I could buy a demon, do you?" he asked a young woman jogging toward the southern exit. A veil covered all but her dark eyes and the symbol burning on her brow. She gripped the handle of her basket as if it were a weapon as she strode away. "Miss." The woman kept walking. Maybe that mark blinded and deafened her to the adversary's servants. Or maybe she's just ignoring me. Shouts of "Stop that thief" and other enraged screams finally overwhelmed the dancers and their bells. The instant they stopped, their eyes sharpened, and they turned on each other, shouting accusations that gave way to shoving. Without that song to mute it, the adversary's call strengthened. Gore shook out his fists and sank into the floor, merging with it. But not even cold stone could thwart the adversary's influence for long. "Where do I find a demon?" Children darted between stalls picking up discarded items while some brave souls ignored the fighting and kept on haggling for the reeking oil lanterns and candles on display. The latter group was mostly women with babies, though there were a few fathers mixed in. Crosses and other religious symbols glowed on their chests each time the adversary called. Not one of them answered his repeated questions as Gore passed by them. They didn't even acknowledge him. "So, there's a way to mute my new master." Gore tucked that useful tidbit away for later. Right now, saving his friends was his top priority, and that meant finding a demon in some dinner, so when he saved his friends, he could avoid eating them. "They're in trouble because of you. You led them into the goddamned Ageldar," rasped his conscience. No, that was Dirk. This was all his idea. And that's all Gore could remember, standing by that godforsaken pit, then darkness, and a voice ordering him to find a demon. He had bits of other memories, but they were a hodgepodge of still frames. Some had associations, but most didn't. "I didn't know it was a sleeping giant biding its time, but I'll bet Dirk knew. This was his scheme, not mine." He told his conscience, but the truth felt hollow. He hadn't cared enough to thoroughly research the job because rumors about ancient monsters were a penny a pound in Shayari. His throat burned with thirst, and he wanted to slake it with Dirk's heart blood. Or the blood of his friends, prompted his dark side as it showed him images of a well-known cave. Blankets had been strung up to break up the foundling's cave into smaller compartments and offer some privacy to its occupants. Ragged children and teens moved through those cloth aisles, and his mouth watered for a taste of the bright sparks dancing inside them. Gore extended a hand to grasp one of their stick-thin arms and pull the teenager into his arms so he could drink, but she faded away, and so did the foundling's cave. He'd imagined both here. 5 aisles over, a group of teens fought over a dropped candle. They reminded him of the Lumiere stones that cast nothing but shadows since their glow was extinguished. They didn't tempt him, not like that foundling girl. What did she have that they lacked? A cold prickle at the base of his spine sent Gore diving for cover. He sank into the cold stone floor seconds before the adversary's voice boomed through the low market. "Go, sinner, the prize is thine. Take it, my allies, our time's nigh." A shadow of the adversary passed through the market, leading the rabble out of the nearest exit. That devil had too many shadow selves. As Gore levitated out of the ground, his hunger increased. This wasn't the same summons he'd been avoiding for hours. What was this prize? Part of him no longer cared as his thoughts swung back to that foundling girl in a corset, and the pale globes of her mostly exposed breasts. Oh, they jiggled while that spark had danced inside her in that brief glimpse. His mouth watered for a taste. The adversary had cycled back to the beginning of his creepy summons, and it struck a chord in Gore's dark soul. To hell with the adversary. If he wants a demon, he can fetch one himself. Gore floated toward the foundling's cave on the other side of the lower quarters. I know where you can find someone more powerful than a demon. Who said that? No one who'd passed Gore had even glanced in his direction, even though he'd been talking to himself for quite some time now. Someone who owes you a favor. After all, you did wake me up. Laughter followed that shocking statement. I don't remember setting anyone free. That doesn't sound like something I'd do. Who are you? Someone who's offering you a way out of a bad contract. If you don't want out, I'll find someone else. What way out? What are you offering? What did the adversary do to those who displeased him? Could it be worse than what I am now? That thought gave Gore pause, until his stomach growled again. Come to me, and I'll show you what I have in mind. Your new master will find it quite vexing, I think. I don't need your help. I've been avoiding him just fine on my own. Oh, really? And what about your friends? The word friends was a hammer blow to the ash heap that was his heart. His growing hunger had driven all thought of them out of mind. Where are my friends? Gore struggled to remember where he'd last seen them, but there was only that fleeting memory of a dark pit and VR calling his name. Did I answer him? Your friends only have so much air to breathe. Then what? Will they die or become wraiths like me? That's up to your new master. He might let them go, or he might chain them to him like he did to you. And part of Gore wondered if that would really be so bad. But only for a moment, then he cast such nonsense aside. Of course, that was bad. I don't want my friends reduced to what I am now. Where are my friends? They're waiting for you. Where? The adversary loves irony. Where do you think? The place where your unlife began. And the same place where he'd unknowingly released a monster just like Dirk had wanted. That jerk must have known what would happen. And now the Eldars talking to me. Everything was coming full circle if his greatest mistake was reaching out for a tête-à-tête. Gore dropped his head into his hands. You killed me. How can I possibly trust you? That was an accident. I've been imprisoned for a long time. Telling friend from foe is hard after the first century of solitary confinement, and I've been down here for 10 or 20 times that long. But that's beside the point. I can't hurt you now, but the adversary can. I'm offering you a way to slip his leash. I don't believe you. That's the beauty of this. You don't have to believe anything I say. Just come and see for yourself. And if I don't? Your friends can't survive long in the pit. So, I'd come if you care for their well-being. Gore stiffened at the implied threat. His friends wouldn't last long under those conditions. But what if that creature was lying? So much of the incident where he'd freed the monster he was talking to was lost during his transformation. Which friends? Give me some proof of life. Come and see for yourself. The Eldar's presence receded before he could ask any more questions. Gore slumped onto a table next to an array of pipes. He'd been so caught up in everything, it had never occurred to him he could return to the pit. But my friends can't walk through solid stone. That was a complication, but one he could deal with later. I need a plan, or better yet, a trump card in case that creature turns on me. I don't trust it. That foundling girl floated back into his thoughts. Her dark eyes sparkled, and a mocking smile turned up the corners of her Cupid's bow lips. Come sinners, darkness rises. Do what your desires advise. I recommend you comply. Come sinners, our time is nigh, the adversary said. His summons whispered through the empty market as a black mist stole through the stalls. Gore smiled at the idea, nosing around the recesses of his mind. Then he sank into the stone floor and passed swift and silent as a shadow out of the market. He headed not for the Ageldar where his damnation had begun, but for the cave where he'd befriended Dirk all those years ago when they were foundlings too. A feast of souls awaited him. He'd partake of it, then see about saving his friends. What the bells say. A black cloud shot through the tunnel, filling it. Sarn coughed until the air cleared. But it did no other harm. He was just as tired as he was before. The black mist settled at waist height and thickened as it clawed at his cloak, but there wasn't any magic in its fabric anymore. Sarn straightened, holding his son above that magic-stealing mist so no part of it touched Ran or his bear. Because they might still be magical. Without his other sight, he couldn't check. What's happening? Ran whispered in Sarn's ear. Either there are more black Lumiere crystals exposed to the air, or there's only one, and the more magic it eats, the stronger it gets. I don't like the sound of that. Ren shivered. Me either. How can we tell which it is? We find it and take a look, assuming there's something to see. Sarn climbed over a pile of rocks, ducked under a leaning column and grimaced at the obstacle course ahead. If we can get to it. Must we do that? Ren asked in a small voice. His eyes pleaded for a no. He'd had enough adventures for one day. Yes, I promised to help JC. Oh, by the final fate's flaming webs, get it off me. Yurston slapped at his clothes. Calm down. It's not on you. It's on the floor. In his arms, Ran shivered and pressed in as close as he dared to Sarn's pendant. Its steady white glow calmed his son. No darkness could steal its light. No darkness could steal its light, that thought repeated, and each time it did, its significance grew. Could it be that simple? Bear had said everything had an opposite. Maybe he'd always possessed the black Lumiere crystal's antithesis. Was that why the Queen of all trees wanted me here? Because Mount Eredrin is somehow the source of those black Lumiere crystals. If so, then Mount Eredrin must also be the source of its antithesis. Because every bloody thing must balance, according to Sovan. Bear had also said something about that, and JC too. What is it, Papa? I've got an idea. You know how to fix this. Ran gestured to the collapsed column. Sarn picked his way over, and the oppressive darkness outside the crystal's nimbus. Hope crept into his son's voice. Maybe. But I only have one crystal and two foes. Which one should I use it on? What will cause the biggest ripple? Sarn tripped when the stones under his feet gave way, and he stumbled to the bottom of the pyramidal pile, clutching his son who had a death grip on his cloak. How will you fix things? Ren asked when they'd reached solid ground again. But Sarn wasn't ready to explain, not while his plan lacked a lot of critical details. I need to find more crystals, like my pendant. If I could access my magic, I could do it. And I could figure out what's so different about it. But Sarn suppressed that thought. He wasn't ready to face the question again, not when it meant leaving his son unattended in a dangerous situation for fates knew how long. Wait, Sarn. It's not that way. Yurston shouted. But the bells of Mount Eredrin cut him off. Sarn froze. He was a tuning fork homing in on the message those bells were sending, the one message he dreaded receiving every night. They stood under one of the tubes piping those bells and their summons to every corner under the mountain. Ren covered one ear and pressed the other against Sarn's chest to muffle that too loud ringing, leaving one hand free to count the bells. Each peal struck Sarn and vibrated his bones. His heart slowed to beat in time with their measured tolling, and that made his vision go all wonky. 1, Rand said as a deep bong reverberated through the lower quarters. For some reason, the bells were louder under the mountain than up near its apex where they were located. That probably had something to do with the layout of the lower quarters. They were a perfect echo chamber. No one knew why the Lithirians had made it that way, nor what they'd used this sprawling warren of dark tunnels for. Rand uncovered his ears, but those bells weren't done. Neither was time. It had been marching on without making its progress known. Bong. Rand clapped his hands over his ears again and left them there, not trusting those bells to cease because they couldn't. They must ring my doom. Sarn felt them building up to that fateful hour, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. He was out of time. 2, Rand said, holding 2 fingers up. Bong. 3. The promise stirred as it did every night, knocking Sarn off balance. He leaned into the wall. It can't be time yet. It just can't. Bong. Rand held up 4 fingers. Pressure built inside Sarn as his map roused. That damned question blocked its connection to his magic, but not the promise. No, that thing rose inside him, wrapping him in another man's purpose as it warped his will, bending it like the clay it was in his master's hands. 5. Voices from the past murmured, soft at first but they grew in volume, changing that interminable ding-donging into words. Swear. 6. You'll obey. 7, 8. They told faster now, their song bearing down on Sarn as the bells counted down to the one number he dreaded. No. The denial stuck in his throat. He couldn't say it because he'd already agreed to this before the son he clutched close to his heart was born. Obey. 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 9, 10, 11. Then a pause, because an answer was required. It didn't matter that it had been given almost 5 years ago. His knees were bending as that pause lengthened, dragging Sarn emotionally back to the best and worst decision of his life. Obey. 12. Swear you'll obey, Lord Jorinth said from memory as Sarn's knees hit the ground hard, sending a sharp pain through them. A small foot landed on his thigh as Rand shifted in his arms. 13. Papa, are you okay? But Sarn couldn't move or reply. The past had him in its claws, and it was crushing him, grinding away his will to resist because there was no resisting inevitability. Papa. 14. The promise reached out. Even blunted by the question, it could still dig its claws into his psyche and rip. 15. The promise spun Sarn until he faced away from the slowly moving Yurston toward a dark bend. Everything inside Sarn screamed at him to rise and go. Find your master now, now, now. 16. The wall to his left buckled. But it wasn't his magic thrusting through it. His magic was caged somewhere beyond his reach but not gone, and it was fighting to return to his hand. We are one. Take us back. It screamed. 17. Papa. Rand huddled against his chest as a tentacle broke through the wall. 18. Rocks fell, but Sarn couldn't dodge or shove his son aside. The promise rooted him to the spot, but he had no magic to deflect the debris hurtling toward them. I must answer its call. The promise wouldn't release him unless he did what it wanted, and it wanted him to go to his master. Which master? I have 3 of them. Which master do I go to? He asked that shadowed nobleman sinking into his throne in his mind. Lord Jorinth, Nalshira's shadow, didn't answer. Neither did the promise, but time did. It dilated, attenuating the pause between peals and froze those rocks midair. Everything hinged on the answer to that question. Not Lord Jorinth, because he gave me to Gerlo, and Gerlo handed me over to Nolo. Nolo. Death's marksman's name echoed in his mind. He was both the answer and the destination. Time resumed, and those rocks dropped to the ground and landed just a few inches shy of them. Maybe that was the promise's doing. After all, he had to be alive to fulfill its terms. The bells of Mount Eredron spoke again. Nolo. 19, Rand said from where he sheltered against Sarn's chest. Too bad naming the hours couldn't rewind them or silence their summons. 2 more tentacles punched through the wall, widening the hole. Rand screamed, but his voice was drowned out by that maddening tolling. Somewhere, Nolo repeated the words 20th bell, and that command levered Sarn up. Invisible hands propelled him forward, away from one danger, and headlong into a more complicated one. Nolo. 20, Rand said as that last peal freed Sarn. He shouldered Yurston out of the way of a whipping tentacle and shot around the bend. Rocks fell and the ground shook, but Sarn kept running. He couldn't have stopped if he'd wanted to. The promise had him in its claws, and it yanked him into the darkness. Behind him, echoes of the bells faded out as they ceased tolling. Their job was done for another hour. Where are we going? Rand gripped his tunic, pulling the collar taut against the back of Sarn's neck. Sarn. You're going the wrong way. Yurston puffed to a halt and gestured to the right where a tunnel trembled from the assault its neighbor took. We have to go that way. It's the last transverse before the river surfaces. Across from them, a doorway led to a stairwell, and the promise forced Sarn into it. His master was up there on one of the floors above, waiting for him. I must go to him. 3 levels above, on a dragon-shaped end table, a clock ticked. It nestled in the belly of a pewter dragon and was quite the expensive marvel, one the commander of the Rangers never tired of looking at, nor did he have a single regret about purchasing it. 1 month's salary was a small price to pay for an accurate clock. Its minute hand pointed to 5 minutes past the hour as Gerlo looked up from the papers he was stacking. Footsteps resounded in the antechamber. He regarded the door, expecting Sarn, Nolo, or both to appear as the door opened. The trouble with paperwork. Commander? What now? Can't you see I'm busy? Gerlo dropped a messy stack of papers onto his chair. Maybe they'd stay there for a few minutes so he could get somewhere with the sea of papers still covering the floor thanks to that earthquake earlier. Ranispara raised an eyebrow at the mess. Did I miss something? Just another earthquake, Jallister called from Gerlo's outer office. What else is new? We seem to have them every couple of weeks. They keep life interesting, not that we need it since as Rangers we have. Enough, Gerlo shouted. He'd banished the loquacious youth of middle 20s to his outer office to make copies of next week's schedule, because the Ranger couldn't do anything without running his mouth. At least out there, Jallister could put that gift for gab to good use screening his visitors. In theory, anyway. In practice, it hadn't quite worked out that way since a constant stream of interruptions kept appearing in his office. Well, don't just gawk at the mess. Deliver your report. Letters don't write themselves. Gerlo snapped his fingers. Oh right, sorry I saw the mountain jiggle, but it didn't look all that severe from the meadow. It was a short one but still a nuisance, Gerlo said before Jallister could wax eloquent on that subject again. He'd heard enough on that score over the last couple of hours to last him a lifetime. Voices in the passage beyond sent Gerlo running for the door, which he slammed. Hopefully Jallister would take a hint and intercept whomever was headed this way now. Messages were easier to deal with than living, breathing people. With so much paper around, a message could easily get lost for a few hours. It could happen. Jallister was an intelligent young man with a mouth that never stopped moving. He could take a message and send those visitors on their way, but he likely wouldn't. And I have bad news to heap on top of that. I hope no one was hurt. Ranispara rocked back on her heels, something she only did when she had vexing news to deliver. Geirlo suppressed a sigh. None that I know of, but I haven't left my office since the quake. Let's hear your news. Geirlo plopped onto his chair, then levered himself up so he could remove the papers trapped under his rump and set them on his desk where they belonged. We've got a report of a lost boy. A runner. Just saying the word aloud raised the specters of the past, but Geirlo squashed them. He hadn't sent his rangers out to catch a runaway in 5 years, which was a good thing since the last one had been Sarn, and they'd made a real mess of that situation. We're lucky that green-eyed pain in my ass survived. Though perhaps he was being a tad harsh. Sarn was a good kid, and that was the problem. At 20 he wasn't a kid anymore, but neither was he an adult. He was still trapped in that awkward teenage mindset of trust no one and act like there are no consequences. It was maddening because Sarn was a bright young man. If he'd only used that intellect for something other than rebelling against authority figures. Geirlo sighed. Thoughts like these weren't completing the forms due today or getting rid of his current visitor. No, this boy got separated from his friends in the enchanted forest. And we need Sarn to locate him. Geirlo almost laughed at the irony of that, but a knock sounded at his door. Jallister poked his curly head in. Commander? There's a Lord and Lady Vaishans here to see you. About their missing son. Geirlo suggested. Please, let me be wrong, God. I'll donate my next paycheck to charity if you'll send them away. Yes, sir. Should I show them in? No. No. But, sir. No. Flustered by his repeated refusals, Jallister glanced at Ranispara for help. But she held both hands up in surrender and backed slowly away from the door and the subject. I said no. Geirlo scrubbed both hands over his face, then let them fall onto his cluttered desk. Oh God, why? Why me? Why must that missing boy be a nobleman's son? If God heard, he didn't reply. Maybe that was for the best. But sir, Jallister tried again, certain he'd heard wrong. No. Send someone to fetch Nolo. Diplomacy is his thing. Paperwork is mine. I'll get right on that. Ranispara saluted, then slipped past Jallister to carry out orders he hadn't given her. If she was at all relieved to hand off the problem, she didn't show it. She was too much of a professional to let her feelings about the noble set show. What about the concerned parents? Jallister jerked a thumb at the antechamber behind him. I put them in a conference room. Should I fetch them? Geirlo waved both hands, striking that idea down before it could take root. No, leave them there. Send for tea and brandy and whatever else might calm them down. Let Nolo deal with them. Nolo was the people person. Handling nobles was his job as second in command, and the man had serious skills in that department. But they want to speak to you, sir. They were most adamant about that. Wait for Nolo. But. I said, wait for Nolo. Go entertain them until he comes. Don't let them out of your sight and don't show them to my office. Don't even tell them I'm in. Is that clear? Crystal, sir. Jallister exited, not at all thrilled with his assignment. Before he closed the door, he ventured one last question. What do I do in the meantime? Talk to them. You're good at that. Find out everything there is to know about this missing brat. Nolo will need the info. Now shoo. Geirlo waved the young ranger off and slumped in his chair after the door closed. He could only escape dealing with this lord and lady what's their name for so long. Eventually, they'd end up in his office. Everyone always did for every damned thing. Geirlo chucked his letter opener at the wall, and it bounced off a dragon statue. Its crystal eyes mirrored his unease. Why, Lord? Why tonight did you lose a kid and send his distraught parents to my door? It was likely the most uncharitable thought he'd had today, but that's what penance was for. Geirlo wrote a check to the Sisters of Charity for the usual sum, signed and dated it, then put the matter out of mind. He'd send it out in tomorrow's post. Penance finished, he picked up the form he'd been trying to fudge. Hiding Rangers on paper was preferable to respecting the quota and leaving Mount Eredrin undefended. So he got back to it. Maybe he'd finish before the next problem knocked on his door. Or maybe not, judging by the heavy footfalls headed this way. Why me? A clock ticked on the end table. Its claws edged closer to the 21st hour. Maybe that's Nolo or the kid. Sarn tends to forget where he's supposed to be at least 3 out of every 7 days. The pain of tardiness. I'm late. I'm late. Those 2 words were on a constant repeat in Sarn's head. And every second past the hour he didn't appear before his master stabbed a needle into his psyche. A tear escaped his iron control and traced the thin scar on the left side of his face as the promise drove a nail through his eye. For a moment there was nothing but the pain. It was a solid rod of agony widening as he swayed and somehow gained his feet without falling. What's hurting you? Ren asked. The promise, Sarn replied, and that caused the pain to spike. He clenched his teeth to keep from screaming, so he didn't frighten his son any more than he already had. But why does it hurt you? You always keep your promises. Because I'm late. It'll keep hurting me until I fulfill my obligation. Sarn stopped as the pain crested again. The promise stabbed him through the heart this time, but he couldn't breathe until he took that next step. Only then did the pain relent just enough so he didn't pass out. Which obligation? JC is down there. We promised to help him too. Ren pointed toward the echoes of Yersten's voice. He was another problem since he'd seen Ren. But not one I can resolve right now. I'll buy Yersten's silence later. I can't do it now. I don't have a choice in the matter. That's true, I did promise to help him, but there's another promise that supersedes that one. The one you remind Uncle Murrin about every time he skips school. Yeah, I guess that explains why he's always angry with me. It can't be easy having me constantly rub his face in it. Ren just shrugged. So we can't help JC until you fulfill that other promise. Unfortunately, no. That other promise stabbed Sarn in the eye when he slowed on the next landing. He needed a rest. Sleep was a distant memory, but he couldn't stop now. Not until I find some way to defeat or contain the Age Eldar and the Black Lumiere crystal's magic nullifying effect. But he couldn't even make a start on either problem until the promise let go of him. Its hooks were sunk deep into his flesh, and they dragged him up the stairs. How could the promise strengthen with my magic locked away? It didn't make sense. But it was true. There's more to this thing than the adversary had said. And there hadn't been time for JC to explain it beyond the basics. The staircase seemed endless. It was a dizzying spiral corkscrewing through the mountain, and it touched every level including the one Sarn needed, which was still a few more landings away. Why the Lithirians had opted for 40 feet between levels no one knew, but Sarn cursed them all the same. It was their fault he had to climb 250 narrow steps. Nor did the pain recede as the number of steps to his goal dwindled. It wouldn't until he met his master. How will I find him without magic? What does the promise make you do? Go to work. Ren gave him an uncomprehending look. What's that mean? You say that word all the time, but you never explain what that work thing is. Because it varies every night. I do whatever they tell me to do. As Sarn trudged onward, part of him wanted to go to work and do something normal after all the weirdness he'd faced. Because the Rangers were the closest thing he had to normal, and that was a scary thought. The Rangers? Yes. Serving them night after night had become a thread of sanity in his life, and he needed them as much as he needed to make the pain stop. Because he was in over his head, way over, so far over he couldn't see a way out that didn't end in a lot of deaths. But there must be, because I can't accept that. I won't. It's okay, Papa. You can go. I want to go to work with you, Ren said, liking the idea more and more. I want to see what you do and meet these Rangers. They sound like good people, and I like good people. As Ren smiled at a plan that could never come to fruition, a voice screamed a negation inside Sarn's head. No. No, if they see you, they'll take you away. I can't lose you. You are my light, my heart, my hope. Sarn hugged his son close. Who could he leave his son with? Not Murren, because he had no idea where his brother was. Not the foundlings either, because the lower quarters was teeming with monsters. Nor would the promise let him veer from his intended path, and that path curved upward. There was no one left. Shadows shifted all around them, as if they were coming to life. Or someone was searching for them. And the adversary's mark was on the move. While he was with JC, they'd receded, but he felt them crawling up his neck again. They already covered his left arm and part of his chest, but not the hand supporting his son, nor his right shoulder where Ran's head rested. In fact, those marks stayed away from his son. Maybe Ran had some magic after all, or love did. Perhaps that was the one thing the adversary couldn't taint or twist. Before Sarn could move, pain socked him in the gut and he folded. Something touched the back of his neck, making the hairs there rise as two promises squared off in his mind. One pulled him down, but the other pushed him to take that next step. I must go back, but I also must go forward. I can't do both. I'm damned if I go, and damned if I stay. Either way, my son's damned with me. I must find a way to change that. But first, he had to escape this stairwell in one piece. The dilemma dialed the pain up a notch as those two promises fought for control. As their war continued, shadows rose in a black spiral, trapping Sarn. His vision darkened, and the cold hand of the adversary reached through his mark and dug its claws into Sarn. Come sinners, darkness rises. Do what your desires advise. I recommend you comply. Come sinners, our time is nigh, the adversary said. No. Leave me alone. Sarn screamed inside his mind, but the adversary just laughed. Queens and bears, oh my. Somewhere underground near Mount Eredrin. Why'd we stop? Bear asked mind to mind. This isn't Mount Eredrin. No, it's not. I think Gaia's transportation spell swerved too close to the black Lumiere crystal, and well, that evil stone's eating it, which leaves me with a problem, Shayari sent back. Because the shortest distance between 2 points was a straight line, Gaia had yanked Shayari underground rather than allow her to travel overland. I wish I'd fought her. But she hadn't, because she'd been so stunned by Gaia's sudden appearance and interest. The resurgence of those black Lumiere crystals must have awoken the Earth spirit. Not since the Crystal Wars had such a pure specimen found its way into mortal hands. Which didn't explain how Aurelor had gotten her hands on it. We need more eyes inside Mount Eredrin from among the lower-class women who live there. That blasted mountain is sitting on a cache of black Lumiere crystals that must stay buried forever. But she couldn't do anything about that until she got out from under the earth that encased her. Her lungs begged for air and the edges of her sight were dimming. There wasn't much to see, so that was no great loss, but she also couldn't move. The earth pressed down on her with tremendous pressure, and it kept increasing as Gaia's spell waned. If she didn't get out of there, she'd die. But she needed to move to cast a rune. Right, you still need to breathe. Yes. Can't you shift the earth out of your way? The Queen of all trees said you have some Lithurian blood. Bear, being a spirit, could float through the earth. Though Shayari couldn't confirm that since she'd closed her eyes to keep the dirt out. Sort of. I'm a product of a breeding experiment. I have bits of every magical race, but not enough to do anything useful. Hence my reliance on runes. Shayari sent back, though she was stretching the truth a bit. Chalk that up to suffocation. There were two things she could do, but not on this plane of existence. Though that wouldn't be a problem for long. Her consciousness was already slipping free of its bonds. Or was that tingly feeling her body phasing out of this plane? Where will I end up if I black out? Probably the gray between if I'm lucky, and that won't help anyone except the adversary, who likely set watchers there to grab me the instant I arrive. I really hate that guy. Don't let me black out. How am I supposed to prevent that? You're a resourceful bear. Figure something out. The bits of her that were Lithurian strained to connect to the earth, but there wasn't enough, so the connection fizzled out. There went her only exit that didn't involve dying. In any other battle, she could accept death, but not entombed like this. This is not how a Queen of Shayari dies. She rallied against her fate, even though she was powerless to change it. Bit by bit, she was slipping away. Only her superhuman strength and reinforced bones kept her organs from being squished flat, but they were buckling along with Gaia's spell. A few bones had already snapped, but asphyxiation pushed out the pain, making her feel strangely light, as if she was floating. Help me. How exactly am I supposed to do that? I'm a spirit guide, not a healer, Bear said as everything faded to black. Shayari. Bear sent to the inert body, he could neither see nor sense anymore. Bear. Rand called, but his shout was a whisper when it reached him. What trouble is that sweet child in now? Bear reached out, but his spectral paw passed through everything he touched until a root snagged him. Then he was flying away from the child, calling for him toward an uncertain fate. Well, no one promised me a peaceful afterlife. So he went with it. After all, there wasn't much he could do while ensnared by a psychopomp's spell. Though said spell did jink to avoid the black Lumiere, crystal's magic stealing touch. Thank you for that, my queen. On a brow of a hill, the much-reduced Queen of all trees stood cloaked in invisibility while her roots lashed at the air around her. An invisible force held her back. Do not let the abomination cross the standing stones while uncovered, she'd said to that sneering priestess less than a day ago. In her hands, a white box had coalesced. She'd held it out to Aralor. Take it. Put that vile rock inside it. Break the other spells upon my land if you must, but leave the circles intact. Leave this place as the refuge it has always been. Do this one thing, and I will not interfere. At the time she'd meant the twin rings of menhirs surrounding Mount Eredrin, but she hadn't said that. I forgot how many refuges and circles make up my land. Now, the Queen of all trees was bound to a promise that confined her to this spot, and damned her forest and her people until Aralor broke that promise. Which she won't, because a promise sworn to an entity like me is binding until death. It won't let her break it. Nor did Aralor even need to get close to Mount Eredrin to break those circles, not if that damned crystal kept expanding. At the rate it was going, it could affect Mount Eredrin in another 12 hours, give or take. Then the containment field she'd woven into the box would fail, because that stone would have grown beyond its ability to counter it fully. The queen of all trees tried again to move toward that priestess and her doomed acolytes, but her word was an invisible wall barring her way. Normally, reducing her awesome stature required her to shift the bulk of her power elsewhere, so she didn't need a 1,000-foot-tall silver tree to house it. But the black Lumiere crystal had nullified some of her power. The closer that gem came, the more it affected her. The queen of all trees flinched as another one of her children broadcast his pain to her. Before the link disintegrated, a black beam shot out of that horrible crystal. It stripped him of his enchantments and reduced him to a gray husk rapidly dissolving into dust. He'd stood for thousands of years. Now, he was dead. The wind was already scattering his ashes and all he'd seen to the four corners of Shayari. That was the pact she'd made. When her children fell, they would not be forgotten. Their essence would seed a new Shayari. But his soul lingered, held here by a debt of blood and honor. A long, long time ago, he'd turned on the refugees who'd founded this country. He was supposed to protect them, but he'd slaughtered them in a senseless war. Since then, he'd guarded this land and the descendants of his victims. But his penance was over now, so she gathered his soul in, and he passed through her heartwood to the gray between life and death. Farewell, my child, you've earned your freedom. Your debt to me, my land, and my people is repaid. Go now. Rest in the arms of the one king who made all. Another tree fell sliced in half along with its sisters and brothers, as the platform the Seekers carried tilted. It was finally affecting its doomed bearers. Nothing could stay long within a black Lumiere crystal's event horizon. It was a void pulling everything into it, even the life force of the fools carrying it. A psychic cry of anguish slammed into her. It hadn't come from the Seekers. Then who called me? An image of that young man with luminous green eyes flashed through the Queen of all trees' mind, but she couldn't see Sarn from here, not while he was inside the twin rings of menhirs between her and Mount Eredrin. Did I call him in time, or did the adversary get him? No, the Queen of all trees shook her crown. Sarn was too well hidden. The adversary could call all he liked. Sarn would never fall to him. His heart was too good for that canker to corrupt. From the outside, Mount Eredrin looked the same as it always did. The Queen of all trees tried to go there, but the promise stopped her because Aurelor headed that way. And I promised I wouldn't stop her. So I can't go anywhere she might go. Next time, I'll word my promises to leave me an out. Shayari had found one. Where is Shayari, my sister queen? She went after Aurelor hours ago and should have reached her by now. But there was no sign of that determined immortal. That cry came again, softer this time. Shayari. Are you in danger? The Queen of all trees scanned for the source of that distress call. It had come from underground where her roots drank deep of the world's power and its beliefs. Whose side are you on, Gaia? The Queen of all trees extended her branches both physically and on the spiritual plane until she snagged a fuzzy paw. She pulled. A translucent bear popped out of the ground, looking none the worse for wear since his fur was illusory. Thank you, my queen. He turned his head as he searched for something. Where's Shayari? She exercised a loophole and went after Aurelor. Something had happened after that. The Queen of all trees swayed, and a luminous liquid wept from the cracks in her bark. The long years of her life blurred together as the past and the present mixed in her mind. She forgot her guardians were centuries dead and reached for them through their crystal swords. One sword answered her call, but it was weak, no, shattered. Yes, the blade called Legacy was still in the world, but it was broken into 144 pieces. Several of those pieces were just a few miles away at Mount Eredrin. No, I must not call them to me. It's not time yet, nor can I reforge that sword until the curse upon it is broken. And the only curse breaker she knew hadn't come into his full power yet. The queen of all trees shook her silver crown and composed herself. My queen, are you? Bear let his question hang between them. His transparent paw hovered a few inches from her scarred and bleeding bark, but he didn't touch her. She straightened her trunk. You were saying? Yes, Gaia sent her, your sister queen, to Mount Eredrin to stop the adversary, but we never made it. We swerved too close to Aralor's chunk of black Lumiere, and Gaia's transportation spell failed, leaving us stranded under tons of dirt. I'd like never to repeat that crushing experience. Is Shayari still under there? The queen of all trees scanned again, and the cracks in her silver bark widened when her mental eye passed within the black Lumiere crystal's sphere of influence. That damned rock was between her and Mount Eredrin. Bear waved his paws in a frantic negation. Stop, please stop. Shayari, the land and its people, need you. You're the personification of their hopes and dreams. You represent Shayari's glory days when money wasn't king and honor meant something. Bear swept a paw out, indicating the dark smudge of Mount Eredrin 4 miles distant. They can't lose you. You're the heart of this realm, and they know it. The queen of all trees retracted her probe, because the spirit guide was right. She inclined her crown to acknowledge that. Answer me this. Is Shayari, my sister queen, still in Gaia's grasp? Bear shook his head. No, she vanished not long after the spell broke. What do you mean by vanished? Is she dead? I don't know. I could find out easily enough. Despite the black Lumiere crystal constantly nibbling at her power, the queen of all trees was a psychopomp, and she could still shift planes. But you said Gaia tried to send my sister queen to Mount Eredrin. When I left the mountain, the beast was sealed up, and the adversary was engaged in a whisper campaign. Granted, that was some time ago. Do you know what's been going on there since then that might have spooked Gaia? Bear shrugged. Well, Rand did call me a time or 3, so there's that, but he's a small child. You have to take that into account. And children do scare easily. Bear's lips quirked up in an ironic smile. His father is remarkably hard to kill and quite canny for such an inexperienced mage. So they're probably all right. But Bear hung his head. The lad keeps calling. And her children were dying. While the queen of all trees had talked to Bear, 6 more had been dusted. The wind carrying her children's remains ruffled her luminous leaves. The queen of all trees called their spirits to her, and they passed through her bark to the next world and their eventual reward for their solid service. Sarn would have to fend for himself for a while. She'd left him well protected from the adversary. That black Lumiere crystal was the greater threat, and her sister queen had failed to stop it. I can't watch this anymore, but I can't stop it until Aralor violates the terms of our agreement. Our bargain won't let me, not on this plane. But there were others, and some were aligned with this one. In theory, she could shift to one of those, cross the intervening distance, and shift back directly into Aralor's path. If the promise let her. Would it? Those orange-robed souls were so misguided, but she'd run out of time. Re-educating them about the way the world really worked would take too long. I must stop them. The queen of all trees curled her roots about her trunk and severed her tethers to this world. What are you doing? What my sister queen could not. But you can't. You promised. That was all Bear had time to say before the queen of all trees had gathered the ragged ends of her power and spun the wheel to open the way. For all things were circular, even the 12 planes of existence. The gray between worlds beckoned. Wait, Bear shouted as he rushed forward, but it was far too late for that now. Lightning slammed into the ground and stayed there. It was a jagged line of white joining the earth to the heavens, instead of the perfect circle it should have been. As it expanded, that wrongness intensified. The queen of all trees bent double, bending her crown low as a gray fog shot through with red light rolled through that expanding gap. My queen. What's wrong? Bear touched her fading leaves. Is it that blasted stone draining you again? She shook her crown but could not rise. If she had knees she would have knelt, so weighed down was she by the primal forces flowing out of that portal. Then what is it? I don't know. In all the long years of her life, she'd never encountered anything like this before. Or had she? A memory stirred, but it was buried too deeply by time and life to rise to her conscious mind, not while she battled just to survive the onslaught of raw power pummeling her into submission. I must close the way before my attacker crosses through it. She drew on her people and their regard for her, and raised her crown. I will not bend. I will not break. I am the queen of Shayari now and forever. This is my land. You cannot pass. A strange shadow fell over her as she righted herself, and she stared into the red, swirling eyes of chaos itself. O God Most High, what have I done? Bad magic. Wait, Papa. Ren waved a hand in front of Papa's face. His eyes were still a vibrant green even though they no longer glowed. That was a good sign. Maybe the magic was still in there waiting for the right time to return. Ren waved again, but Papa's eyes were unfocused like they sometimes were when the magic showed him things, but his magic was all bottled up by that mysterious question business. I think that's a trick to weaken him. But Papa thought it was real, and the lack of glow worried Ren. It turned the staircase into a shadow-laden blur as Papa rushed up the steps. Papa, what's wrong? Why are you acting like this? True, Papa was a quiet man, but this was a little extreme even for him. Papa, is it that question thing again? Don't let it take you away from me. His voice broke on the last word, and Papa slowed. Even his pendant had gone all funky. It was strobing, and the rapid shifts in illumination hurt Rand's eyes. Are you the problem? He poked the crystal, but it didn't stop. So Rand grabbed Papa's collar and dropped the pendant into the dark chasm it revealed. But pinpoints of white light shined through Papa's tunic, spoiling his experiment. The crystal refused to hide, and Papa kept going onward and upward. Not even the increased darkness stopped his mindless ascent. Papa found those stairs without even looking at them, and that just wasn't fair. Auntie Sovan. Are you here? Something's wrong with Papa. He needs you. And I need you too. Because the staircase was all kinds of creepy. Shadows flowed past like that magic-eating mist, but they'd left that stuff behind in the lower quarters. Whatever the queen tree had done to stop it before wasn't working anymore. She needs to come back and fix that. But only Papa knew how to call her, and he wasn't in his right mind. Auntie Sovan. His angelic aunt didn't appear, and that was strange because she'd popped in before when he needed her. Though sometimes there was a delay, and she'd never explained that. Auntie Sovan. Are you in trouble? That he could understand. Papa often got into trouble, so his sister must be the same, right? They were twins, after all. But she has wings and special powers, and that question thing had stripped Papa of his magic. Rand still didn't understand that because he could feel that magic churning inside Papa. It was an angry gyre of white glowing motes trying to break out of its cage. It heated Papa's skin, which he appreciated since this staircase was drafty and cold. I want you back. You protect me, and Papa gets into too much trouble without you. Rand said to the white conflagration inside Papa. Is there a way I can free you? Rand listened hard. Sometimes the magic spoke to Papa. Maybe it would talk to him and tell him what to do. Ran waited, but Papa turned 2 more bends in the dark spiral that was the stairs. He barely made a sound. Neither did his magic. Maybe it can't talk to me because of that question thingy. Auntie Soven. Her name echoed, and the stairs groaned, but she didn't pop into view. Nor could he sense her presence. Where are you, Auntie Soven? Why aren't you here? Far below and getting further away every minute, Yerston shouted about this being the wrong way, but Papa kept climbing as if he hadn't heard. Nor did Auntie Soven reply to his repeated calls. Bear. Do you know what's happening? Bear didn't answer either. His fuzzy body rested in Ran's arms, plump and lifeless like a true toy. Bear's home was empty of its ghost. Bear, where are you? Why aren't you here with me? A tear slipped down Ran's cheek. He was all alone against whatever had overtaken Papa. Papa, come back to me, Ran said into his father's shoulder as another tear fell. You promised you'd never leave me. That still didn't garner a response. And that wasn't right because Papa was a stickler about promises. He always kept them even if the keeping hurt him. Is that what's happening now? Is the promise hurting you again? But how can it? Promises are only words. Ran chewed his lower lip. Papa made a lot of promises, mostly to him, but every now and again to others as well. Right now Papa had 2 promises to fulfill. Well, 3 counting the one he made to me. Maybe the 3 promises were warring for control of Papa. That didn't explain how they could hurt him, though. Why won't you talk to me? Instead of answering, Papa kept running up those stairs, and his gaze stayed focused somewhere deep inside himself. Water dripped on Ran's head. No, not water. Papa looped around another bend, and a clay hand held a guttering Lumiere crystal. Its yellow glow picked out the tears running down Papa's cold face. Before its light winked out, it revealed the problem. Those black marks were back. They headed for his left eye. Oh, no you don't. You can't have Papa. I don't share. Papa. Ren wiped those tears away. Come back to me. I need you, and you need me. Magic sparkled as it spread from his fingers across Papa's cheek, breaking the strange spell and, more importantly, shoving those marks away. Those thick black whorls receded until Papa's tunic hid them. Papa slammed to a halt, breathing hard. Ren, he said in a shaky voice. It's okay now. Bad magic got you, but I chased it away. But it might come back because Papa no longer had any protection against it, not with his magic locked away by that question thing the adversary had sprung on him. But the bad magic didn't get me. Maybe it can't. Ran patted Papa's cheek. If it comes back, I'll protect you from it just like you protect me. No, not bad magic, Papa said finally between gasps. It's that promise I made before you were born, the one we just talked about. It's binding even without my magic. It might even be stronger without it. Papa started to explain, but he didn't have to. Ran already knew all about that particular promise. Uncle Murren often complained about it. But this seemed like more than that. Somehow, this was the adversary's doing. Pain racked Papa. He doubled over, but held tightly to Ran with shaking arms. The bad magic's hurting you again. I'll stop it. Ran squared his little shoulders and prepared to do battle. A white spark danced in his heart. It was an offshoot of Papa's other power, the newer one he'd used to call the Queen Tree several times now. Despite the question thing and the black Lumiere crystals, it still burned fiercely inside Papa, searching for a way out. I'll be your way out. Ren patted that conflagration. Papa's magic didn't reply, but it had heard him. Maybe it was already working through his little heart flame. Ran waited, but he didn't feel powerful. Maybe his little gift needed a push. Burn brighter. I want to be a big fire like Papa. His internal flame bobbed around. Are you growing? It was hard to tell because Papa jostled him each time he looped around a bend, and the staircase had lots of those. Maybe his little light needed another push, or perhaps a poke to get it going. That sounded about right, so Ran wedged Bear between him and Papa just in case, and poked his gift. It poked him back in a very ticklish place. Ran squirmed, trusting Papa not to drop him, and he didn't. Apparently, his magic was more playful than serious. Maybe it needs training. How did I get Papa's mind back before? Ran fiddled with Bear's sparkly bow, the one JC had given him, and smiled. A pale glow coated his fingers. He touched Papa's face again, and the bad magic released him. Papa slid down the curving wall and sat on a step as a rogue shadow melted into the wall. It was the bad thing that had hurt Papa, not the promise. Ran patted his cheek. I told you I'd protect you. Papa's eyes widened in surprise. What did you do? Bear helped. Is he back? No, but his bow has special powers. So do I. Ren smiled, but the darkness drained his mirth, flipping his smile to a frown. Papa winced. He was still in pain, but it didn't control him anymore. It's still hurting you. Papa nodded and gritted his teeth as another wave of pain threatened to send him away again.